Welcome to our next episode of Unlock Your Potential. I'm Steve Picaro.
And I'm Barry Rubin.
Today, we're going to talk a little bit about leading change. Just getting this recording off today, you talk about change, the seasons changing, we're preparing using new technology, we're using new formats. And it just reminded me of all the things that many of us are going through on a regular basis. So I thought it would be a good idea to talk about some strategies, some tools, some tips to deal with change. Change is something that it's inevitable. It's happening all the time. We talk about a constant in our life, our career, our business. Change is one of them. And when you least expect it, bam, something happens, right? Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's ugly. But at the end of the day, it's really our attitude. How do we mentally prepare for change? What are we doing different? And how do we lead it versus being dragged into it? So today we'll share some strategies. We'll share some examples. And Barry and I have been when we talk about change on LinkedIn, social media, Facebook, Instagram, all YouTube, just in our careers, our life, it's constant. So let's jump in and talk about really the before, after, and the transition, and think about how we set that up. So Barry, when we talk about change, when I think about the before, and you and I were talking about things in the past, I shared a meme about the 80s, right? When we were dancing and doing things, that was our comfort zone, right? We knew that feeling. We hearkened back to the days. Some of us wish I had hair, right? I carried a comb. I don't know if I ever told you, after I shaved my head years ago, I still carried a comb for a few months out of habit. And then one day I looked down and I'm saying, why am I carrying this comb? So, what was something when you think about the before, what was something that you went through or look back at as a comfortable point in your career or your life?
Um, well, I, wow, talk about a loaded question. Um, the first thing that came to mind was when I was living in Los Angeles and working as a makeup artist, and all these strikes kept hitting, and I decided I had to lead the change. I needed to pivot and do something else. And that was very daunting. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I just I basically started praying and, reading help wanted ads at that point, because it was well before the internet was full of job boards and ways to find employment opportunities that were not written on paper.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, so that was that I knew I was headed up a big hill, because even though I had a college degree and even though I am intelligent and well read, I didn't have any proof that any of that existed after working for 10 years as a makeup artist. So I found myself pretty much starting from scratch.
Yeah, it's interesting when we think about the before, it's comfortable, it's well worn, we're used to that. There's a sense of security, right? We talk about our comfort zone. It's the way things have been. I was reading an article about Windows is phasing out support for Windows 10. And I'm over here thinking, I feel like I just upgraded to Windows 10, and now they're pushing Windows 11, and 70% of their market is still on Windows 10. And it's interesting, little things like this. The
I
minute,
I
Go
was just
ahead.
gonna say, I feel like I'm still getting used to Windows XP. I mean, it's
I know,
crazy.
I know, and it's so funny, and there are so many things happening. Again, when you think about technology, but even in our career, using technology. But the moment we sense change or even the potential for change, this phase ends and we start thinking about that transition, already now, I'm over here thinking, you know what, and I was reading this article. A lot of people are commenting, my computer's fine. It's a few years old. Why am I forced to buy another computer to run Windows 11? Or why, I think Apple did this, there's articles when they kind of slowed down their older iPhone, so people had to upgrade that forced obsolescence. And,
Mhm.
there's a lot of things we think about going forward. So when we move from the before to the after, there's always a transition. Aging, think about this every time we look in the mirror. Oh my gosh, I don't feel this old, but I'm starting to look it, right? We think about adding skills, becoming more or less financially secure, or maybe we're preparing to do certain things. This phase ends when we think of ourselves as no longer changing. And that's when we're almost, for me, when I think about change, I think about being on the trail. Over the years, I've mentioned I do a lot of hiking and crossing the streams. And there was a stream last year. There was no bridge, but there were stones. And these stones were pretty far apart and they were wet. And it was late spring, so there was a lot of water coming down. And I had to go from one stone to the other carefully. And when I think of change, sometimes that analogy comes to mind for me. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, wow, are we leaping from one stone to another? The destination, when you're crossing that stream, is really the other side. It's the new normal, or in our mind, we've reached a certain level. It feels a little bit comfortable and secure. And again, physically crossing the stream, there was a sense of relief. But sometimes, if we don't like change, how do we get across, right? For some people, and I've been there, I don't feel comfortable crossing that stream, stepping on those stones, extending and going over to what I need to do. So how do we do that? So I
Well,
think it's interesting. Go ahead, Barry.
oh, I was just going to say, listening to you speak, the first thing that came to my mind was the feeling of insert feeling here, exhilaration, relief, um, completion, all of those things that you feel once you get through to the other side. And for me, that key is looking back to where you were and looking to how far you've come. And and I think part of getting through the transition of change is anticipating the new place that you're going to be instead of looking at it from a fear perspective and try to see change as hopeful because not all change is bad. And I think a lot of times we just have a fear of the unknown. And
Yeah,
and you can see that the stones are slippery and you know you've got to do it. But that third piece is think how good it's going to feel when I can pat myself on the back because I got to the other side.
right. But okay, so think about this. I know how long my stride is. I'm looking at those stones saying, can I bridge that gap? Or am I going to have to put my boot in the water because I can't make it, or I have a backpack on? Am I going to slip? Right? There's a lot of things that go through our mind. If
Right.
the stones, and there have been times when the stones are continuous, you're basically just walking across. But when there's a gap, metaphorically, figuratively, literally, that's when we run into this.
Right.
So when we think about change, there's a couple things that come to mind. There's continuous change, there's incremental change, there's transformative change, and then there's disruptive change. And I think sometimes they merge or they run together. And in our mind, this was a transformative change, right? One side of the bank to the other. When I'm hiking, I'm usually going uphill or I'm moving along the trail. But if we take them and interchange them? Are we saying, oh, this is disruptive? Is it transformative? And sometimes they can be a hybrid, it can be a combination. So when we think about continuous change, what about aging is one of those things, right? We talk about certain things right now. I just noticed it said the sun is going to set, I think, at 8 o'clock or 8:01 p.m. And I just said the other day, man, the days are getting longer. And I'm over here acting surprised, like it hasn't been doing that every day or every year for my life. But it's a nice, gentle reminder that the longer days are coming. There are things that we go on continuously working out. Hey, I'm feeling better. I'm working out. I can do certain things continually and gradual. And so in some ways, we're mentally prepared for that. You have a look, Barry. Do you have a
Yeah,
continuous change
I was
example?
thinking, yeah, I was actually, and this is a physical change that had emotional ramifications. When I had that really bad accident where I fell down 2 flights of stairs and practically ripped my arm off, for months I could barely move. Even turning my head or trying to lift a finger was excruciatingly painful. And I had to go through physical therapy and it hurt. And I was like, oh my goodness, this pain is never going to end. And it really did seem like that for months and months and months. But one day the pain was a little bit less and a little bit less. And I had a little bit more range of motion and a little bit more ability and a little bit healing in the scar. So it didn't look so angry. And that was disruptive and transformational because I lost the ability to do certain things and I had to learn to compensate. So you're in that situation, you're not thinking change is good, it'll be better when I get to the other side. It was just more like, oh, I can't wait to see what the outcome of this is and what my future is going to look like because it just kept changing. And now it's been 13 years
Wow.
and 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 sometimes, when I'm having trouble opening a jar with my good hand, I switch and I use the shoulder that was injured, and I'm actually able to open the jar. And it's like, hallelujah, how did that happen?
Well, Barry, so on one hand, I would also add there was some incremental change
Mhm,
going through recovery,
mhm,
right? So incrementally, again, when I injured my wrist and you go through that, but when it happened, it's disruptive, right? That
mhm.
initial sudden, unplanned incident, unprepared, it's usually perceived as negative. I got hurt, you got hurt, we get in a car accident, your computer doesn't boot up, or you get the blue screen of death or whatever.
Yeah.
That's a disruptive change. And all of a sudden we're like, what do we do? So to your point, it could start off disruptive, it could be incremental, it can be continuous, it can be transformative, all in the same, getting your ability. When I got my hand back after my accident, I went through all those stages of change, disruptive, well, continuous, the healing part,
Right.
but incremental as you were able to do more things.
Mhm,
And it was transformative to your point when you said, wow, I didn't even think about it and I can do this. So it's interesting in our daily life, in our professional life, there are always things going on.
mhm,
It's important to categorize these, I think, and to label them so we can understand what's happening. And not that one's better or worse or different, just to understand where we are on the trail and how to prepare mentally, physically, right? The disruptive change, we know things are going to happen. Again, just getting on the road this weekend, Memorial Day is coming up.
mhm.
You think about what's going to happen, and they're talking about, I'm thinking I'm just going to stay home. I don't want to go, except I'm going up to Massachusetts to see my family. And so I'm mentally preparing and to be prepared for some of those things.
Yeah.
So,
And I just was along those lines, I'm mentally preparing myself because I looked at my gas meter in my car and I realized I have to drive to Pompano Beach on Sunday and up to Jupiter on Monday. And I don't have enough gas to do that without stopping for gas. So I'm mentally preparing for the line at the gas station because it is what it is.
no, and well, so, this brings us to this next point is, we need to look at how we're feeling, how are we thinking about this? Excuse me, you're being strategic, you're being practical, you're being realistic. You're going to go there knowing, setting expectations. It's a holiday weekend. I need to get gas. I know I'm going to be on the road. There's going to be traffic. I'm going to leave early. I'm going to take my time. I'm going to bring snacks. My wife and I, there's a place where we take a break and we get iced tea, and it's like our iced tea break, and we always laugh because we're drinking this low, it's a diet iced tea, and it's like the only place around, so it's kind of our halfway iced tea break. But so we prepare for certain things emotionally. We want to set our tone and our expectations because sometimes our thoughts create our feelings, right? When something happens, is that our expectation, our unexpected results give us unexpected feelings. Again, accident, injury, something happens. Or if we are expecting it, what does it do? It helps us set the tone going in there saying, you know what? I knew there was going to be traffic. I knew there was going to be a delay. I'm mentally prepared to deal with that. So, how do you set your emotions? How do you set your feelings? And this is a great example. What happens if you go there to get gas and there is no line? And you're saying, wow, I'm pleasantly surprised. Timing's nice, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I've been the last couple of years have been so not what I expected from my life. And so a lot of times, and I've mentioned this in other podcasts, that when things happen that are unexpected, I try to view it from an internal sense of humor and call it a plot twist. But when I am stuck in the middle of it and I'm in that transition phase of a disruptive change, I have a mantra, change is good, change is good, change is good, change is good. Or if I realize that it's bad and it's snowballing, I'm like, all right, brainstorm, brainstorm, solve the problem, solve the problem. Like it really is just rolling with the punches, try to ride the wave when it's good and try to steel yourself if you're headed into rough waters.
Right. And it's all about attitude.
Mhm.
We talked about resiliency in the
Mhm.
past. We've talked about proper preparation prevents poor performance. And,
Mhm.
being prepared, there's a lot of things that we do to mentally prepare. Certain changes we know are inevitable, part of life. In some ways, we know what that norm is. And I think, on one hand, when we talk about wisdom, insight, experience, at this point in our life, the norm is this wide, I think, or wider. In the past, it was like, oh, if it falls within this narrow range or outside of that. And that's part of that maturity, that process, right? Especially you think about our careers, you think about our life, you think about what happens in the world around us, right? On
Mhm.
one hand, is it being open-minded, understanding that I can mentally prepare, or am I going to hold on to my guns and say, I'm afraid of the new system. I don't know if I'm going to be competent. I don't know if I have the experience. At some point, I think, like a lot of things, think about even our cell phones. I was watching a video talking, I don't know, they were talking about technology, and someone said, oh, I didn't realize we had the hashtag symbol way back then, and the hashtag was the pound symbol. There was nothing, our first phones, you couldn't do anything except make a phone call. And the hashtag is because you needed to put a dial tone in. But you think about how, as the technology developed with our smartphones, people, I have friends, some of them are veterans, in their 70s, 80s, even 90s, getting online using technology. So when we're mentally prepared, we adapt and we go there and say that was a nice incremental change. And then again, we're at this point where I have friends and family from a health perspective and aging perspective, kids, prospective grandchildren and children getting married and all these natural things. It's exciting, it's scary, and it allows us in some ways to say, am I prepared for that next stage? So I
Mhm.
think part of it, Barry, to your point, is mentally preparing ourselves, understanding that change. Some ways there are certain things we want to happen fast, right? Let's go in and get it over with. You mentioned ripping off that Band-Aid.
Mhm.
And you just had speaking of your fingers, you had that little, injury on your finger.
Little.
Right. And you think about how we go through some of these things. And I think our attitude really helps us overcome and deal with some of these changes, right? Going into it knowing that I'm going to lead change versus being dragged by it really helps set the tone.
Mhm. The other interesting other side of the coin, because we're talking about change, and it just, and again, sometimes when you say things, other things pop into my head. And here we are talking about, mentally preparing yourself for change and disruptive change and transformational change. But a lot of times it's a process and it feels like it's going to be a transformative change, but things really don't change that much. And the thought that came to mind was the more things change, the more they remain the same. So,
Right. So again, is this based on experience, wisdom, and insight? Yes, you're at this point in your life where you've been through that, right? So you can look at that and say, you know what? I've seen, not that no one's ever really seen it all, but I've seen a fair share. And I'm
mhm,
thinking, how do I prepare? So one of the ways, and you bring up a good point, seeing how it plays out. What is our default mode? Sometimes the best strategy is the simplest, right? We go into this neutral and we want to be open to what's happening. We want to respond appropriately versus reacting. And
patience, patience.
right, right. So we're neutral. We assume a wait and see attitude. We want to observe the process. And we don't, I mean, I don't want to get my blood pressure up. I don't want to overreact and bounce around. So we observe, we notice, we wait and see. We're curious, which is, it's a great way to say, you know what, let me see what happens. But in the back, we're planning, right? We're being open-minded, just like when I was in the operating room, right? We come in with a plan A, B, and C. And because I'd like the motto, be prepared, we always had a D, E, and F ready to go, and sometimes even more. So I think for people as we go through this change, it's having that default mode, being prepared. And this is where that self-confidence, that self-esteem, that experience again that you go through, you bring it to bear and say, and Barry, you've been through this again from a health perspective. I haven't had this challenge before. I've had similar challenges. What's the best way for me to address this?
Mhm,
Right? And you've been through a lot. And in some ways, you can talk about topics and things, and I think you've handled them like a champ. Not saying it wasn't challenging, it wasn't difficult, but you were able to overcome, adapt, improvise in a sense,
mhm,
and deal with that. And we know it's not easy,
mhm.
right? But we also know I can make it go by differently with my attitude. And you're a shining example of that.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice.
Well, it's true.
Really.
It's true.
Yeah.
You know, you may not hear it enough, but I think it's important that, one of the things when we talk about change, many of us in a position where we're in a caregiver role, right, with our families, our teams, personally, professionally, our organizations, we have friends. We talk with our supporters to share information. And sometimes when people share information, we think it's only affecting me. The reality is, and I think I shared this during the pandemic, I was doing webinars because people needed help with working from home or dealing with the pandemic. And I was doing webinars all over the place remotely. And I would talk to people, again, corporate America, academia, municipalities, all types of nonprofits, and everyone said, "Oh, we're the only ones going through it." And most people felt that way. And then they would turn the news on and they start taking the blinders off and saying, "Oh my gosh, we're all going through that." So having that network, that support, people who are in a similar situation, have similar values, ideas, beliefs, um, it's great to know that you can share that experience with them. My experiences, for instance, I don't have the same experience as Barry did health wise, but I've had similar experiences. We have similar family situations, not exactly, but enough that there's an overlap and we can support each other. In a workplace situation, many people are able to support one another. We talk about career transitioning, people who are going through that. There's enough similarities that people that we talk to can understand what the change is. Doesn't mean we have the answers, but sometimes it's nice to know that there are people who at least understand what we're going through.
Right.
So when in doubt, we want to talk to our group, our tribe, our family, our friends. Sometimes it's venting, brainstorming, um, getting perspective, information. There's a lot of different things. Sometimes just support, right? I don't need to solve it. Sometimes I can just listen to help somebody, and vice versa.
Right.
Um, the thing with change, which is interesting, it kind of comes back to us, right? What's our choice? We can either like it, accept it, support it, or fight it. Is there anything else we can do, Barry? When it,
Well, uh, I've seen people try to ignore it, and that definitely does not work.
yeah, right. So think about it. I think and it's hard sometimes. Yes, there are times, do we procrastinate? Do we put our head in the sand? One of the things that we all deal with, especially over the last few years, the pandemic, the economy. Right now, there's a lot going on in the world, which it seems like it's happening all the time. Some of you know my son just got back from the Middle East. I have another son over in Japan in the service. There's a lot of different things going on, and our resiliency, our adrenal glands are constantly on. Sometimes we're drained emotionally, physically, spiritually, and taking a time out to recharge. Again, it's no different on the trail, right? When we're going through a tough section of the trail and we say, "Hey, we're going to take 5, take a breather, gather ourselves, take a drink of water, adjust our backpack, and then keep going." That's the important part about change. Stopping to take a break, not a problem. Getting back up, continuing, that's our goal when we look at this, because it's not going to stop. That change is out there. And it's funny when I think about the trail, life is like a continuous trail.
Mhm.
There
Yep.
are always obstacles. Some we like. I remember a couple of years ago, I don't know if I told you, Barry, we were coming from Massachusetts into New Hampshire, and there was this wild blueberry patch, and we stopped and ate blueberries along the way, and it was like the best thing ever. And then I found out that you can go up there during the season, and the ranger that you can collect your blueberries, but that was like the best treat on the road. And then there are some parts of the trail that are death defying, crossing these rivers, muddy, all types of stuff. And I look at the trail and there are beautiful sections, there's rough sections, there's dangerous sections, and then there's comforting, relaxing, level ground. And our life is like that. So when you think about change,
Yeah.
there's going to be all types of change. When I go backpacking and I put my backpack on, I'm mentally preparing to accept everything that comes my way. I have the skills, I have the tools, I have the supplies, and more importantly, I have my trail, my friends on the trail to help each other. We help each other get through it. I think that's a great philosophy in life.
Yeah. And again, talking about support groups and, making your way through change and um, dealing with things as they come. Another thing that pops into my mind was watching my cat Gracie deal with the passing of her sister, Tipper.
Hmm.
She was very, very upset, and I'm sure it felt like the world was ending for her. And what did she do? She just took a nap.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just got to check out and do a reset. And then you wake up and you find treats and snacks and a human who's there to take care of you. And your litter box is still in the same place. And now there's more room at the dinner mat when food comes. I mean, so, you know, change is inevitable. And so it's so funny that we have these two expressions that we hear over and over again. The one that I mentioned earlier, which is the more things change, the more they remain the same. And the one that we mentioned at the beginning when we started talking about this, which is change is inevitable.
Yeah.
So it really is about just sort of rolling with the punches of life and knowing that nothing ever stays the same. So even if something turns out really badly or an endpoint that you didn't expect, it's not going to stay like that. So in addition to being open-minded, again, I think being hopeful and looking to the future, just know that it will be different at some point. And that also ties into resiliency, you
Hmm.
know. And sometimes persistence isn't what you need. It's just resilience, because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Sometimes you don't have that control. So um,
Yeah.
just
No.
being able to sort of, move with the waves and, stop and take a breath and do a mental reset. That's all you need to get through to the other side. And that hopeful attitude of just waiting to see what happens when it's something that you don't have the capacity to make change as the change is happening.
Well, you mentioned this earlier, and I'd like to end on this note, being flexible, agile, right?
Mhm.
When we talk about resilience, again, the idea is being flexible, being able to stretch beyond and come back to the norm, right? Whatever that is,
Mhm.
knowing that it's a temporary situation. And temporary is a relative term. Again, the pandemic, nobody knew what was going on, right? Something happens. Again, traffic, when you're sitting in traffic and you're like, oh, I don't know how long. And we all have horror stories about traffic. But understanding, Barry, to your point, that we're going to get through this and there are going to be people to help you. The light is at the end of the tunnel. Um, this is the process we're going through. So, on one hand, build your team, right? Get your family, your friends, your supporter, be part of that network. I like to say givers gain. The more I help other people and support them, the more they support me. And there are times when I reach out and there are times when they reach out and we support each other. And I also think our attitude, right? If you look at the people who are dealing with change, our outlook, our perspective, use that wisdom and that insight to your advantage. Talk to the people. I'll share a quick example. Um, I'm part of our local community television board of directors. I got a call the other day. They wanted help interviewing a 93-year-old World War II veteran.
Wow.
And we want to record his experiences, not only as a veteran, as a business owner and a member of the community. So when I look at what he's gone through, especially with Memorial Day and the friends he talked about, the friends he lost during the war, he was one of the only people in his unit to survive.
Wow.
We put things in perspective and we say, wow, how do we deal with change? So whether it's our outlook, whether it's our attitude, whether it's our vision, whether it's our motivation, right? How do we take that and move forward? So
Yeah.
I'd like to leave it with that thought. I'd like to wish everyone a meaningful Memorial Day. Remember the holiday, why we uh, remember our veterans who gave their life, or the veterans who never came back, our service members, and think about going forward how you would like to lead change and, make it part of your life versus being pulled by it.
And speaking of Memorial Day, I would like to thank you and all of your sons for your service. I mean, talk about a family that has made a difference between your community involvement and your military participation. The whole family is just, I mean, you guys are a shining example of true American spirit and being of service to your community. And thank you very much.
You're welcome. So thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time on Unlock Your Potential.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye bye.